Mr. Gaetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very concerned about the influence of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. There's no prohibition against the Department of Justice hiring lobbyists to be prosecutors, is there?
You mean former lobbyists, I hope.
Yes, that's correct.
No, there's no prohibition.
And can you describe for us the specific vetting that the department does when professional influence peddlers are hired and given prosecuting authorities?
Well, the hiring of assistant U.S. attorneys this is a career hire made in the different U.S. attorneys' offices.
I mean for the Washington. I mean in Washington at DOJ, are there any special procedures that vet lobbying contracts or maybe who a lobbyist worked for before they're given prosecutorial authority?
So again, I'm not sure what kind of person you're speaking with. If you're talking about line prosecutors, there is a background check. Everybody, I'm sure here is familiar with the SF-86, has to be filled out, includes all the people that you worked for. The same is true in Maine Justice.
But there's no special review for lobbyists as opposed to people who've been engineers or had any other career?
I don't know, but I don't believe there's a difference, but obviously lobbying may raise conflicts.
Let's ask about political consultants. Political consultants are people who get paid to ensure that a candidate wins or loses an election, that a political movement is successful or unsuccessful. Is there any prohibition against hiring political consultants as prosecutors at the department?
Again, I don't think that we're allowed to even look at people's politics. The question...
No. It's not their politics. It's the profession of being a political consultant. There's no special vetting for them,
I don't think that there's a specific prohibition. There is a requirement that once somebody becomes a prosecutor, just like when somebody becomes a judge, that they get rid of whatever preconceptions they had before and that they go forward under their new responsibilities and are subject to the ethics rules of their new responsibilities.
We would hope that would be the case, Mr. Attorney General, but I tend to think that if people are in the influence peddling game or they're prosecutors, it can be kind of dangerous to mix those, to be an influence peddler for hire one day, to be a prosecutor the next, maybe to rotate back and forth among those careers. And it sounds like there's no special vetting for lobbyists or political consultants. Let me ask the question about partisan committee staff. We have partisan committee staff that you see here. Their job is to ensure that one party or another preserves or captures the majority, that legislative proposals are successful or not successful. No prohibition against the department hiring partisan committee staff as prosecutors, is there?
As I understand it, every administration, including the one preceding this one, has hired people who have been committee staff. I don't think there's a statutory limitation. If the House of Representatives and the Senate think that partisan, or I'm not sure what
that's how Preet got his job. He worked for Schumer, and then he ended up in the Southern District. So we have people who can be lobbyists and then prosecutors. We have people who can be political consultants and then prosecutors. We have people who can be partisan committee staff and then prosecutors. The public integrity section has jurisdiction over election integrity, correct?
It has jurisdiction over election crimes, yes.
Yes. So is there any prohibition against people who've been lobbyists, partisan committee staff, or political consultants actually going in and serving in the public integrity section, or is that allowed?
Just say again, the hiring in the public integrity section is a career hire made under the civil service. It's not made...
I know, I'm worried about their prior career, though. See, what I think is that if someone has been a political operative, to then put them in charge of election crimes, it's kind of like having the fox guard the hen house, don't you think?
So if you think that, that would be a perfect example of something the House should pass a statute barring people from particular professions from working in the Justice Department.
And would you support that legislation?
I'd have to look at what it is, and I have to look at whether it itself violates the First Amendment, but I don't think there have ever been any restrictions like that before.
I appreciate your open-mindedness, and I hope that persists during your time at the department. Would you provide the committee a list of lobbyists, former lobbyists, or just former political consultants who work in the public integrity section so that we might inform on the legislation that you've suggested we might consider?
I don't intend to create a list of career officials and what their previous jobs were.
So if there are people who literally were political operatives who have prosecuting authority in the area that oversees elections, you won't give us the list.
I don't have any idea whether there is any such person.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Attorney General Garland, for appearing here today in a timely manner and responding to our questions, as well as for your efforts to be responsive to the issues facing America today. Thank you. I want to address two primary areas in my limited time: attacks on elected officials and attacks on elections. Several of my colleagues have pointed out the far right's lies about election integrity have led to intimidation and threats of violence and death being made against elected officials and their families. In Pennsylvania, we saw armed extremists come across state lines to try to disrupt the counting of votes in Philadelphia, and an election commissioner had to put his children in hiding after death threats were made against him and his family. With the reopening of schools this fall, we've now seen similar criminal conduct being directed at teachers and school board members with the encouragement of far-right extremists, including some elected officials. I take this personally because I was a school board for 10 years, almost a decade, until 2015, and during that time I had thousands of hours of conversations with involved parents and constituents in grocery stores, on baseball fields, and in courtrooms and school board meetings. Sometimes the discussions were passionate, but everyone always respected the boundaries of protected speech, and those exchanges of opinions and information were always conducted with the goal of exchanging information, reaching solutions for the community. We never, ever experienced any threats to the personal safety of board members, educators, or their families, and that has changed. The personal and physical attacks that have been directed against school leaders in recent months have crossed well over the line of protected free speech or parental involvement and have become criminal conduct. And that's what we're talking about here. As you noted, parents have a right to be heard and to complain and to argue, but parents and outside agitators do not have the right to criminally harass or threaten or assault school leaders and their families. We've heard some of the incidents that have occurred elsewhere around the country. In my district, police had to be called to several meetings after agitators disrupted the meetings. And elsewhere in Pennsylvania, a candidate for office urged community members at a public rally to, and I quote, "Forget going into school boards with freaking data. You go into those school boards to remove them. I'm going in with 20 strong men, and I'm going to give them an option. They can leave or they can be removed." I mean, that's not ordinary speech. I mean, it's the type of conduct that has led school boards and school officials to request help from law enforcement. It's shocking, but perhaps not surprising, that some of our colleagues have tried to frame these criminal acts as free speech by involved parents. It appears to be part of a pattern by far-right politicians of fanning the flames of chaos and turning a blind eye to domestic extremism and violence. The conduct that terrorizes educators now across the country is no more like that of ordinary parents showing up at school board meetings than the conduct of the violent mob that showed up at the Capitol on January 6th was that of ordinary tourists. I think there's a profound distinction here, and one that warrants the attention of law enforcement. Would you agree that allowing threats of violence and intimidation against elected officials to go unreported or unpunished could not only lead to greater violence against elected officials, but also contribute to an atmosphere that's harmful to free speech and the free exchange of ideas?
Yes, I do agree.
Okay. Moving on to attacks on elections. For almost 2 years, the former president and his supporters have attacked and spread lies about election security in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Almost a year after President Biden's victory, attacks on Pennsylvania elections occur today. Last month, Republican members of the PA legislature launched another attack on Pennsylvania voters. They sent a subpoena to the Pennsylvania Department of State, demanding that the state turn over the 2020 voting records of every voter in the state, along with their driver's licenses and their social security numbers, so that information could be turned over to an unidentified private contractor. Pennsylvania voters of every party and independents were outraged about this invasion of privacy and the possibility that sensitive personal information was being put at risk. Can you address how this kind of sweeping intrusion into election and personal data under the guise of an election audit might violate federal election laws?
Yes, I can't. Let me just say on the previous point that you made, although I gave you a quick answer, a full answer is we have an election threats task force, and we've had that for quite some time. I've met with the National Association of Election Administrators and the National Association of Secretaries of State for every state, and that's what prompted us to establish this task force. Now, on the second question, I don't want to discuss any particular circumstance, and certainly not that one, but there are provisions of the Voting Rights Act that require state election officials to keep custody of voting records and voting equipment and materials relating to the last election, I think for 18 months. And similarly, there are provisions of the same statute which prohibit intimidation of, or acts leading to the intimidation of voters. Both of which are sort of the core of the federal government's concern with respect to
Ngày ấy bên bờ sông La, anh nghe câu hò ví rằng để một đời anh đi xa, để ngàn lần anh nhớ mãi. Ngày ấy con đò đưa tiền một người lữ khách qua sông. Người ơi sao mà sâu nặng, câu thương câu đợi câu chờ. Nay anh trở về bên dòng sông La, con đò vẫn nguyên dòng sông con đó. Câu hò quê mình mộc mạc mà thương, ngày xưa anh mang đi khắp nẻo đường. Câu hò vì rằng cho anh đầy mơ ước. Nay anh trở về bên dòng sông La, con đò vẫn nguyên dòng sông con đó. Câu hò quê mình mộc mạc mà thương, ngày xưa anh mang đi khắp nẻo đường. Câu hò vì rằng anh thương trọn ngày ấy bên bờ sông La, anh nghe câu hò ví rằng để một đời anh đi xa, để ngàn lần anh nhớ mãi. Ngày ấy con đò đưa tiền một người lữ khách qua sông. Người ơi sao mà sâu nặng, câu thương câu đợi câu chờ. Nay anh trở về bên dòng sông La, con đò vẫn nguyên dòng sông con đó. Câu hò quê mình mộc mạc mà thương, ngày xưa anh mang đi khắp nẻo đường. Câu hò vì rằng cây rừng muối mặn